big change.
Well, first, actually, I wanted to talk about Lee's story. It is so amazing, and it's unfortunately not as well known as some other of her contemporaries of the time. How did you first encounter her story, and kind of what was your first impression of her?
Well, I'd heard about Lee Miller from doing some development on a Second World War women project. And I'd used her photos to kind of look at what that world was, because I was trying to find more and more pictures of women. And she had done that in the war and behind the scenes. And then Kate Winslet called me on a Zoom. And yeah, who can say no to Kate Winslet? She has been the driving force behind this. She's got this amazing passion. She knows everything about Lee Miller. And she took me down to Farley Farmhouse, which Lee Miller's son and her granddaughter run as an archive. And we went through, and they took me around the whole house, and we went into the archive, and they pulled out all her images. And you suddenly realise what an amazing body of work and the things that she did. So that was how Kate just kind of took me with her.
Well, and Anthony, Lee's son, talked last night about how similar he thinks, or the similarities he thinks there are between Kate and Lee, their kind of tenacity, their daring, I think he said, and their curiosity. What was it like working alongside her for something that you both ended up being so passionate about?
It was, I was obviously a huge Kate Winslet fan, and she does not disappoint. She's exactly like you hope she's going to be. And in fact, it was kind of like we were airdropped in, and we lived together for the whole time. So we lived together in Croatia while we were prepping that part and shooting. We lived together through the whole of Budapest. And you think, she obviously is hugely talented, but then when you live with her, you realise how much work she does as well. And it was so, she would be up at 5, going off to hair and makeup, and then I would see her, I'd be prepping, so we'd go onto set, and she would be she was in every scene apart from 2, and so she was just constantly, but in between takes, in between scenes, she'd run out, we'd plan stuff that we were doing the next day, we'd talk through it, and then we would go back at night and we'd look at the script for the next day, and she almost has a photographic memory, so she knows it all inside out. And then we would go through and we'd say, we could tweak this a little bit because of the way it went today. This line would hit more powerfully if we just, so we'd just go through. And then I would go to bed. She would go upstairs and work with her dialect coach to make sure that she had those lines. Then she'd go to bed. Then she'd back up at 4:30, off to 5 o'clock. It was, pretty amazing. When you work, I'm kind of obsessive like that. And to meet someone who's the same, and then on the days off, we would, Josh O'Connor would come in and we'd just run all the lines together and just make sure that everything, I cut it all together in one little play almost, so on final draft, so that we ran all of those Lee and Tony scenes, well, I shouldn't say that, Lee and the journalist scenes, and so that we could see whether there was anything that didn't work and how smoothly it ran if you put them all together rather than space them out. So it became its own little play, and we ran that, Josh, Kate and I, to make sure that it all worked. So she just doesn't stop. It's perfection, which is what you want. Amazing.
Yeah. And there's always a bit of pressure that goes along with making a movie about anybody who's a real life person. You want to do them justice. But when you have family members involved too, where it's a lot of the film is based off of Anthony Penrose's book about his mother. How does that either add to the pressure, or kind of does it help having that resource there as well?
It hugely helps. My whole career I've made films about real people, and it's an amazing privilege. The people are so lovely, and they bring you into their lives, and you get to share total insight into what's happened, and lots of the families that I've been in, worked with in the past, or still in touch with, and Tony will be like that too. He's such a wonderful person, and unlike other projects where that person is the family member, they obviously know them inside out, Tony not only is that, but he's also Lee's biographer. He's Lee's archivist. He has a very pragmatic, he can almost stand outside and tell, it is an encyclopedic knowledge of all of her work. And he's still, he's flying, he's got an exhibition at the Gagosian next week. He's he's flying around the world doing her exhibitions. And so it's an add, on top of being her son, he also is the person who probably knows more about her work than anyone else in the world.
Well, and you talked about Josh O'Connor there briefly, and Kate is in, as you say, almost every single scene, but the supporting cast is really impressive too, and you have so many talented people, Marion Cotillard, and but I wanted to ask about Andy Samberg, actually, because you kind of heard everybody, I think, in the audience last night kind of go, Andy Samberg, and obviously he has moments of levity, but he also has some very deep and emotional moments. Can you talk about kind of finding some of those key cast members for those smaller roles?
I came onto the project quite late. Kate she had done 6 years before I came on. Then she got in touch with me because then it was starting to be, let's now really roll it out. So she had already put together nearly all the cast by that point. And, Kate is wonderful to work with. And, so she could ring up people and say, let's go and do this. And they'd all she'd put them all together and then brought them along with her. And then she brought Ellen on, and then I came on. And the cast, Andy Samberg was an idea that Marion Hume had, who was one of the writers. And she was like, my God, this guy looks just like Davy. And so then Kate went and talked to him, went through it all. And he is really... Davy Sherman was, Lee was having a very tough time through it all. And Davy Sherman was this guy who could make jokes, but also was a kind of total collaborator and could be, you don't want to be on your own in these situations, and that was what he did, and that's kind of what Andy was on set. He was absolutely lovely and totally trusting of Kate, how do we go there, and just let himself, go to a different place than he'd ever been before, and it was super powerful. Watching him do that was amazing as it went on, because obviously normally he's doing much bigger things, and he just pulled it back, and he would work with Kate about what, where they went, and there was this trust bond between, because he had to trust her that he wouldn't be, come across as the comedian. Mm-hmm. And she is an amazingly generous, kind of warm person who just took him, when they together, they became this team, which worked perfectly as well for the actual film, because that's what those two were a team, totally trusting, and they could switch. I mean, in reality, they switched each other's cameras. They did, they were always just working together, and it was like a kind of a unit that was totally cohesive, and that's what Andy and Kate became, and that was lovely to see.
Kind of a symbiotic.
Yeah, it was, and that's because it is quite a serious subject, and you want someone like Andy who can kind of make a few jokes and lighten stuff up, and the set was lovely. It was Ellen, Pavel, the DOP, everyone was, and Gemma Jackson, the designer. It was this, really felt like a film where everyone was coming on. It was an independent film. It wasn't where people were being, couldn't pay everyone their full fee, but everyone was just mucking in and literally, running in and doing all the stuff themselves. And at the end, it was just an amazing shared experience, because you were all part of it, and you couldn't have done it if everyone hadn't done that. And there's something lovely about that. So everyone was super proud of it, because it had been, like something from 10, 15 years ago.
Well, Ellen, when I was talking to Ellen earlier, she mentioned just briefly how women's stories can be harder to get made in general. That's just the reality of it, kind of. But there are so many women involved in telling Lee's story. Was that kind of intentional? And how do you think that helps the set and things like that when you're trying to tell a woman's story like that? How important do you think that is?
I think it's really interesting, because I think you want to tell women's stories, but not just for women. It's got to feel like it's a story. And what's great about Lee is she's not an angel. She's not she's not the other end of the thing. She's a complex character. She wasn't super nicey nice. She had to be driven to get where she wanted to get, but she was generous and open, and and she knew what she wanted. And I think Kate certainly wanted a female director, and she'd known Ellen from Eternal Sunshine, so she brought Ellen on, 3 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever it was. So she brought Ellen on, and then and it was, I think what you want it to feel like is it's not just for women. And I think the strong thing is that when you have women telling the story, it's not like you have to think about feminist themes or putting forward women. What I really felt was that all of three of us, Kate, Ellen and I, have always all come up through, the industry when there wasn't a lot of, Ellen was one of the, first DOPs to kind of, she's female DOPs, and Kate obviously has been at the top of her game for a long time. And I remember coming up, since 1993 when I was 28, and it was around these production tables there was only a couple of women, and things are changing, but rather than we didn't talk about any of that. What you do is you just bring it with you. That's who you are. We've all had to drive through that and be that, and we are women who want to get things done, and I think that just feeds into it rather than a conscious decision to be a female film. It just becomes that because we all bring that experience.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's actually a line in the film that where Audrey talks about the things that Lee is able to capture as a woman that men wouldn't think of, that they just look right by it. It doesn't register with them. And I wondered when you were able to look at her photographs and see that as part of the story, what really struck you about her point of view? And was there kind of one or two elements or photos even that stuck with you even after production kind of ended?
Yeah, the thing I'd seen Lee Miller's images, but when I went through and kind of looked at them chronologically and how it all happened, it was really interesting because she obviously was taking these surrealist artistic images, and then the first bits of the Blitz that she took in London are surreal. It's what looks like a chapel puking out rubble. It's a tree in the middle of an empty street which says unexploded bomb. They're surrealist type images, and then as she moves into Europe, it becomes about the people, and then it switches and becomes a much more real. It is no longer surreal. It's actually, this is, now I'm documenting the truth, and you can see that change in her. When she arrives in Normandy, and you see the determination, I'm going to do this, and then the reality of what doing that is kicks in, and that becomes a much more serious thing. It's no longer about her wanting to go out and see what the war is. It's actually, now I see what the war is, I need to tell everyone else what it is. And I think, that was really important. And the images, what I really felt, because as we were doing the film, Russia invaded Ukraine, and I really feel like there is a direct thread from what Lee Miller took in the 40s and what we take now as war photography, because she took the people who were actually affected by it, the hospitals, the women, the children, the refugees. And back then it was much more the soldiers and the front line, and that's what the men wanted to take. And I think partly because she wasn't allowed in all those places, but also because she really wanted to represent those, she had something happen to her as a child and no one had told the truth for her, and so she was showing their truths. And in Dachau at the brothel where the young child is, and moving through. And I think that in order to tell those stories, it's important that we show those pictures.
Well, and you've spent so much time with her story now, and you're talking about it again here. What do you think you've learned from Lee as you've been a part of that process? What are you taking away from it?
I think what I really admire in her is just this ability to just go through. And it's very easy to kind of drift through life, and you can do your job and your things, but really the way to make a difference is to just throw yourself into it. And she threw herself into things, and she searched for the truth, and she put it out there. And too often that's not necessarily what people are prepared to do, and there was an adverse effect to her life, but she was prepared to pay that price, which is quite extraordinary.
Well, and now that you've gotten a chance to share it with audiences, last night being the world premiere, what was that like, finally getting to kind of, I don't know if you were sitting in the audience or...
Yes,
okay, what was that like, getting to share that with everybody?
It was quite amazing, because it's such a kind of communal experience when you've got, there was, I think, 2,000 people in there, and it was things like when when Kate comes and finds Marion Cotillard again after the war has happened, and she gets back to France, and she goes into the house to see her friend, who we've seen in the south of France in the drenched sunshine, and Marion looking glamorous and amazing, and they're having this beautiful time, and then she turns up at this house, and when there's this woman sweeping, and she calls Solange, and she looks up, and there was an audible gasp in the audience, and you don't know that's going to happen because you've never seen it with people. The biggest audience before this was 38. It's like, because we just wanted to check whether people understood everything, and that was way back, when we were in the first cut. So suddenly you've got to, and then, and you realise then, oh, it's done what we wanted it to. And the moments of when it was really affecting when they went into Dachau, and we had deliberately chosen not to show. I mean, obviously, physically you can't. There aren't people who show how horrific, the physicality if you've been in those camps that long. And then, so we turned it onto what Kate and Andy see, and those moments in Dachau were totally silent in there. When it was just, you could hear a pin drop, and you just thought people are understanding what this means. And then, when Josh O'Connor looks at the photo that was the picture she took of those bodies, it was just it's haunting and horrible, and people realise what that is, and you could feel that people were as shocked as we were when we were kind of choosing the images and what we do. And I think it's lovely to see it out in the world and hope that more people know about her.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving the time today and the movie. It was wonderful, and I'm hoping so many more people get to know who she is.
Yeah, I think it would be great. I think she's super inspiring.
She really is.
Get stuff done. That's what you want people to do.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.